All right, everyone, thank you for coming to the Butte Archives. If you've never been here before, welcome, and for those of you that keep coming to these, thank you. Today we have Desera Towle from, well, she is from Helena but lives in Deer Lodge, and today she will be presenting on Janette Kelley, who is one of the main people behind Betty Crocker and all of these wonderful things on display here. You guys could just hold your questions and comments until the end, just so things don't get a little hectic. That would be great. And again, thank you for coming to present.
Thank you, Tyler. I do have some index cards and some pens up front if somebody has a burning question that they will want to write down. Feel free to pop up there and get one of those, or we can pass them out. My name, as I said, is Desera Towle. For today, if somebody wants to address me, just call me Des, because Desera is a lot to get out and remember. So I'll let you guys call me by Des. And like Tyler said, I grew up in Helena, and my first association with history was riding with my grandmother, my mother, and my sister. My sister's right here, Stacy. After church, riding up and down Last Chance Gulch with my grandmother saying, well, here's all the details on this building, and this is who lives in this building. And she was one of the early preservationists and on the historic preservation side of urban renewal when it came to Helena. And the other thing was that my very first independent study research project was, I realized, over 55 years ago when I did a semester's worth of original, before the internet days, using index cards, research on why the Chinese came to Montana and why they left. And that was before anyone was really even interested or even talking about the Chinese in Montana. So those are the beginnings of my history and research. The rest of it is after retirement. I've just ended up being interested in history again. In both Stevensville, I affiliated and helped start the Friends of Fort Owen, a state park that we have been saving, and also on the Historic Preservation Commission committee. I'm a regular member I'm not a member of the board, but I attend regularly. And this is how this whole thing came about, because we have a gold medal sign in Deer Lodge on Main Street, and we wanted to find out more about the history and whether General Mills, who is gold medal flour, would help fund that. As a result of my inquiries to the archives, I found out, no, they weren't going to help us maintain it. But here's some more information about Janette Kelley. And so that got me going down this whole rabbit hole of research about Janette Kelley, because in Deer Lodge, you kind of hear this rumor, well, was she really Betty Crocker? Wasn't she Betty Crocker? Who is she? And about every 15, 20, 25 years, somebody writes an article. Oh yeah, but there's no mention of her in Deer Lodge, except at the cemetery. And she is on the tour for the cemetery under the name of Betty Crocker. So we will start today. One more thing, does anyone just have one burning question that they just want to get out now, or do you want to wait and see if it's answered in my presentation? Okay. I'm sorry. I noticed other people had cookies. I came here twice. I didn't know I was supposed to bring, or that Betty was supposed to bring cookies. I'll make you a deal, though. Whoever, the first 5 people that complete the puzzle and turn it into the archives desk, I'll bring the Betty Crocker carrot cake box mix for you to pick up as your prize. 5 of you. It was just in all recipes saying that out of all the ones at the grocery stores right now, the Betty Crocker carrot cake mix is the best. So it's almost Easter. That's what I'll do, if you're interested. Okay.
I got lost.
Oh, hi, Jane. This first slide is the puzzle that I was talking about. And this is where it all began for Betty Crocker's creation. This was advertised in the Saturday Evening Post in October of 1921. And you completed this full-page puzzle. They called it a picture puzzle, and sent it back to Washburn Crosby, and they would send you a pin cushion. And the pin cushion, let's see if we can get this right. They took the Washburn Crosby flour sack, made it about a 2 by 3 inch little pin cushion. It came in a wooden box, and you received that in the mail. But what they didn't know in their advertising department was that women were needing to have questions answered about baking. Why did my cake fall? Why does this pan not let my cake rise up very far? All these questions they sent in with these puzzles. They got over 30,000. And that's what started them thinking about, how are we going to answer these questions? Who should answer them? They knew as advertisers. Now, this advertising department at Washburn Crosby was very sophisticated. And it was all men. That's not why they were sophisticated at all. But, and the women were all in support functions back then in 1921. But a man by the name of Sam Gale really knew something about marketing, and he decided, and that's Gale spelled G-A-L-E, there's a whole library with the Gale family library in Minneapolis, and he decided to get board approval to create an entity. So the entity that they created was Betty Crocker, but it didn't start out as Betty Crocker because they had to go to the women and ask them, find us a name, a first name that you think would work. And everybody came up with the name Betty because Betty was kind of friendly, the girl next door, somebody that they could talk to and trust, a friend. And then the men decided to name the surname Crocker because William Crocker was a recently retired board member. So that's how Betty Crocker got her name. Now, but you can't have a name without a signature because they had all these letters to respond to. So they went to the women again and said, give us your handwriting analysis, writing out Betty Crocker. And this secretary by the name of Florence Lindeberg was the name that was chosen, and her signature. Now, as you look at various Betty Crocker items up here, you'll see that the signature changes over time. There's a little tail, the loop kind of closes, sometimes it's straight, but originally they all traced this signature. And an entire staff of home service, home economists was hired to then become Betty Crocker. There was about 25 of them. Janette Kelley, interestingly enough, who's from Deer Lodge, Montana, was already on staff before this was created. I don't know how many months, but she was at least there during 1921. and another woman by the name of Agnes White, who was a nutritionist, was also on staff. They were kind of tucked away in a little cubby hole, had a little test kitchen with running water, that was key, and a stove. And it wasn't a wood cook stove. I don't know whether it was electric or gas. And they were already starting to answer questions regarding baking. Because what is the one thing that everyone at Washburn Crosby wanted to do?
Sell flour.
That's right, absolutely. This was not about Betty Crocker or helping women. That was kind of a side light of the whole thing. It was, their business was actually selling flour. And when you look down the road, this is the childhood home of Janette Kelley, but before we get into that part of her story, I will just tell you that I had never heard of Washburn Crosby Company flour. Had anyone else out here really heard of it? I knew General Mills, but I did not know Washburn Crosby. So Washburn Crosby was started, I'm just going to tell you just a tiny bit about it. There's books about it. But in 1866, a man by the name of Cadwallader Washburn, it's a mouthful, I had to write that one down, started this mill on the banks of the Mississippi River. Remember, the Mississippi River goes right into the Minneapolis-St. Paul dividing line. And on the banks of it, on the west banks of it, he built some support services for other mills, and soon he made it into his own mill. And what's interesting about him is that he was a visionary. Hard to believe that anyone was a visionary back then. We always think, oh, all of them were crooks, or they were, I don't know, just not up with the times. But he was a visionary. And what he did is he looked for the latest technology in the flour milling business. But what made him interesting about that is that he shared that information with other mill companies. Who would think of that today? The idea of sharing business secrets. So in 1874, one of his mills, what they call the A mill, there was a huge flour, a dust flour explosion, and 18 men were killed. And he felt terrible. He personally felt terrible about this. And he created an orphanage to take care of some of the children. He was immediately there to provide reassurance to the families and money, and also that the mill would be rebuilt and that the people had jobs. Now, he was a very unusual man for 1874. That just didn't happen. The name of the flour at that time was called superlative flour. And one of the things about superlative flour was that flour was flour, but it's how you milled it, how you separated it out, because the whiter the flour, the more that people liked it. And that was something that he helped improve by going to Hungary over in Europe and working on what they called the middling process of separating it out. So he was a visionary. By 1880, there's an expo of flour millers in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he takes his flour there. Oh, and he's also got another partner by the name of Crosby, so that becomes Washburn Crosby. And they win all the awards. They win the bronze, they win the silver, and they win the gold medal. So he immediately changes the name of their flour to gold medal flour. A visionary. They even marketed it with little gold medal things that you could, little freebies. So from 1880 until 1921, gold medal flour is out there being promoted because they want to sell it. They sell it in barrels that are 196 pounds. that's a lot, and they have to truck them all around. So they dipped into the barrel to give you your flour. And eventually, in the early 1970s, 1910s, they started changing to flour sacks. Does anyone remember flour sack clothing, dish towels, anything like that? That's what they did. They started doing away with that when the material for it, the cotton, became more scarce, especially as the war approached for World War I. And eventually they converted it to paper. And I had to look this one up. Have you ever tried to open up a bag and you're going, what is making this stick? And you're going, well, what kind of glue do they use? I found out they use flour and water. They don't make a special glue. I was like, oh, okay. So that's how they transitioned into smaller and smaller portable sizes so that they could truck it easier out to the consumer. Okay, so that's a little bit about a digression, but you have to understand that this is Washburn Crosby's goal, is to sell flour. Well, you want people to use more flour. Let's make recipes. Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think you could stand just like half a foot back? I think I heard a little mic feedback up there.
Oh,
No?
okay. Is this better or further back?
I don't hear it anymore.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. They're taping this, by the way, to put this on YouTube.
Yeah.
They put all their talks on YouTube. So that's the beginning of Betty Crocker. And Janette Kelley is involved with doing cooking schools. They went out at that time and went throughout the Midwest and gathered with women and demonstrated how to do cooking and how to bake and use more flour. Now, back to Janette Kelley. This is a story of multiple stories. You got the Betty Crocker story and you got the Janette Kelley story. And in between is gold medal. So she's born in Deer Lodge on June 3rd, 1893, according to the 1900 US Census. And I say that as an important date because in my research I have come across different dates for her birth. But that year, 1900, was the year that they actually requested that you write out the entire birth date, not just age at last birthday. So that's a pretty solid one. And the interesting thing about this house, which was built in 1910, they were living there for the 1910 census, is that her mother, Gertie Galbraith Kelley, bought the first 2 lots in 1909 without her husband's signature. So they were only in her name. I haven't been able to confirm whether it was a built house or lots and had to be built. But by 1912, it does show on the Sanborn fire insurance maps that it was a stucco multi-story house. So she lives there at the later years of her high school years and is influenced by her mother, who originally came out west and was a teacher in Drummond and Phillipsburg. Aha! So there's some higher education being exposed to this young lady. Let me digress for a second. How many here have had a grandparent, male or female, that went to a 4-year college? Anybody? A few of you. Very unusual back in the day to have a college graduate at the turn of the century. In fact, from high school, people had a party at the end of 8th grade because that's all the further that men and women were supposed to go to, or typically did, and then they worked back on the farm. So the next slide, this was her grandfather's house in Deer Lodge. This is another what I call education influencer for her. He came out west to Montana as an appointee from President Hayes as an associate justice of the Territorial Supreme Court of Montana. So that was in 1879. He brought his wife Nellie, 5 daughters, and 2 sons. One son was born the summer that he was assigned to come out here, and she was still in Cherokee, Iowa. He was an education influencer because he was educated. He was educated at Dartmouth in 1857, back in New Hampshire. He was trained to become a lawyer in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a couple of years. They didn't go to a traditional law school the way we think of it. They were trained underneath someone else. And in 1861, he was admitted to the Pennsylvania bar. So he then moved from Pennsylvania to Nebraska with his family and ended up in Iowa when he was appointed. Of note is that both his father and his mother's father, wait just a minute, let me get this right. His, Galbraith's father was a Presbyterian minister in Pennsylvania, and Nellie's father was a Presbyterian minister in Iowa. So you'll see that the Presbyterian side of things kind of weaves its way through Janette Kelley's life also. So her mother Gertie was also involved in establishing the Greater Federation of Women's Clubs in Deer Lodge. She was one of the founding members. And Gertie was also a clerk of the court from 1923 to 1940 in Deer Lodge. And her husband, R. Lee Kelley, was also a clerk of the court. When Powell County separated from Deer Lodge in 1901, he was the first clerk of the court for about 12 years then. So obviously, this was a family that believed in education, and this education, this is the Presbyterian Church in Deer Lodge that I believe Janette Kelley attended because her mother attended it. And in Janette's obituary, she was a member of the Presbyterian Church in Minnesota. This is the high school in 1910 in Deer Lodge, Montana. It was actually a 10-room house that was owned by the Bielenberg family, and they sold it to the school district, which was just a couple years old. It was an accredited high school, but this is where they did chemistry, reading, English, all the other subjects. Janette Kelley graduates in 1912. And she's one of 6 women graduates. I don't know why no men were in that particular class. Her older sister, Margaret, graduated 4 years earlier in 1908, and there were at least 2 men in it. But that's the story when you look at the yearbook. So now it's June 8th, 1912. We don't really know for sure when Janette started in college. Let me see if I can do that. Yep. This is Trask Hall at the College of Montana in Deer Lodge. And the College of Montana had a very checkered Presbyterian past, but it closed in 1914. However, I believe that Janette Kelley attended at least her freshman year there. It was only 7 blocks from her house, and it was accredited at that time. The other confirming note is that she attends Montana State College, and these are the dates of attendance. They went to the vault for me. Thank you very much, the archives and the registrar's office at Montana State University, to confirm these dates. But in the yearbook, there's Janette Kelley graduating, and she does her thesis on Denkus carrots. I had to look it up. That means wild carrots, recipes. Who knew? But her degree is a BS in home economics. And that included dressmaking, art design, chemistry, biology. It's a real mixture of courses for her. Okay, so now it's 1917. And that's the fun. Interesting, when you do yearbook search for this particular yearbook, they graduated in 1917, but another class prepares it, so it's really in the 1918 yearbook. It isn't until the early 22s that they change that policy. So you really have to look. She ends up getting a job, her first job, that later will prepare her for Betty Crocker, is in Livingston at Park County High School. And she is a teacher of domestic sciences. But what's interesting when I checked on this further was that she resigned partway through her year. But in the meantime, they had her listed as being a faculty advisor, and she worked with starting the Hoover Club. I had to look up what Hoover Clubs were. That was something that the head of the U.S. Food Administration, they didn't have the drug part on that yet. Herbert Hoover had created to help distribute food wisely over to Europe, because in Europe they were in World War I. We didn't enter until 1917. So they also wanted to have the kids involved, so they established all these junior cross clubs. So they studied, they became junior cross aides, and they collected shoes, they did all kinds of things, and she taught them food conservation study, how to conserve food. That was really a big theme. She leaves at some point in time at the end of 1917, and is hired by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In 1914, there was an act of Congress that created this part of the extension, what we today call the Extension Office. And she was a very, very early agent. They did not call them extension agents, they called them demonstration agents. So she worked in Columbus, Montana, and the entire Stillwater County. And I read some of her reports, one of them from 1920, tells you how rural and, well, maybe, I don't want to say unsophisticated, they were overwhelmed with just what it took for daily living. She conducted through demonstration clubs. They were charged to create these clubs for women and men. This is before 4-H was even around. She traveled all around the county with these women gathered to teach them. For example, one of the popular ones was how to make a dress form. And she describes putting plaster of Paris on these women so that they can then have their own dress form, because it was so expensive to buy clothes. They could then make their own clothes and go to town in style. They all wanted to have a demonstration class on how to cull chickens. That was a big thing, was how to get rid of your chickens that you didn't want. It was also a time that the Spanish flu hit Montana. It was also the beginning of the drought, was real poverty time. The other thing that's really interesting is the nutrition is a component of home economics and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so they would weigh the children, and they put these yellow tags on them that would say how much they weighed, and that said 10 things that you needed to do to help your, pardon? 30 minutes, okay. So anyway, that was the nature of her job. It was very, to me it sounded really depressing, but she was a white middle-class girl with a lot of education behind her, and here she was working out in the county. She even did a demonstration class to a group of German-speaking women that was covered by the Great Falls Tribune, and she had a translator, and that made the paper. So, all right, let me see where I am. Okay. She leaves the Extension Service and is one of the home economists. We're back at, well, it wasn't even General Mills yet. We're still at Washburn Crosby. This is one of the earliest pictures. You see this picture all the time because nobody has any other pictures in the archives of all these women. I like to think that Janette is maybe the fourth or the fifth person from the right, but as many times as I've looked at it, I still am not certain whether she's in this group. These are all women that have home economics college degrees, which was really amazing. The first person to head up the service department was a woman by the name of Ruth Hayes Carpenter. And she comes not with a college degree, but a great deal of administrative experience from World War I. During that year that she is at Washburn Crosby, starting Betty Crocker, she lives at the Kappa Kappa Gamma house at the University of Michigan. She's about 28 years old, and not the University of Michigan, University of Minnesota. And she was not a member of that sorority, but they seem to have a real open policy. A lot of family names like Pillsbury, et cetera, sent their daughters there. So they had a lot of fun from what I read in the history. At this point, it gets kind of murky about when she leaves Washburn Crosby. But part of the things that she is credited for is this chocolate cake. And I have a picture of the chocolate cake here. And she's credited with making this chocolate cake. And then they used it in print ads, and they used it again and again because they had another theme for selling flour, which was called eventually, ... why not now? And they used that for many decades, literally, selling flour with that. So that's one of her major claims to being Betty Crocker is this chocolate cake. The other thing that she's credited with is baking bread. This particular pamphlet was asked for again and again because she wrote it. Now remember, it's not like their names are printed on these things. They're credited with it. Betty Crocker did this, but it's not Betty Crocker who really created the pamphlet itself or the instructions. But she really believed in standardizing information, and this is a 31-page pamphlet that is credited to her again and again for baking bread. Now, I'm wearing my lab coat, and this is what's interesting. In all the pictures of the test kitchens at Betty Crocker, the women are wearing lab coats. You don't see an apron among them. And this is 100% cotton because it is less flammable than something made with polyester. try ironing this. It was awful last night. So I just wanted you to register why, but they were scientists. Food was a science, and that's where she was coming from. Janette Kelley was trained as a scientist. Now this is kind of a different part of Janette Kelley's background. She was a home economist. And at this time, this whole profession was being created. It was one of the few positions that a woman who was college educated could obtain. It was one of the positions that was better paid in the corporate world. At the same time, Louise Stanley, who has her doctorate degree and was developing her own education credentials, is appointed to be the first bureau chief in Washington, D.C. at the Bureau of Home Economics. Now, Janette Kelley already was exposed to that group of government entities through her extension agent experience. And it was a way that they connected with home economists, because this bureau was a bridge, in my mind, between the corporate world, who just wanted to sell their flour or their product, and the consumer, who are all these women who have more or less displaced themselves from mothers and grandmothers because they left them back at the farm when they moved to the city. So the world was changing, and that's why Betty Crocker succeeds. It fills that role, but interestingly enough, here's an example of a study that they did. This gives you an example of what the world was like in the United States. 1927-28, 2,350 homemakers in 37 states. I'm sure they contacted a few extension offices and a few land grant colleges. But this was about the changing appliance situation in the kitchen and in the home. 1,337 ice cooled. They had blocks of ice cooling their refrigerator. Now this is all about safety of food and nutrition. The next group, they only had 56 that had electric refrigerators. 857 had none. They didn't have anything. So what did that do to your daily workload? You had to go to the market all the time. The idea of the convenience of a microwave or a freezer or even a regular refrigerator just wasn't heard of. But those kinds of research projects are what the Bureau of Economics did. They worked in textiles. They worked to, so that you could buy and understand what size of sheets you were buying. They worked on nutrition. That was what they were designed to do. And Louise Stanley is phenomenon for how she ran that bureau. And exceptional because they didn't really hire that many women to run departments in the federal government. Now, Janette Kelley leaves. For about 20 years, she's away from Washburn, Crosby. And this is very murky because I could not get down the details of exactly how many years she worked at each place. But she worked at a place called Delineator magazine. This is the cookbook that is from that company. They also were the publisher of Butterick Patterns out of New York. She did their test kitchen and was their food editor, and then she moved on. Does anyone here that I haven't spoken to know what the word delineator means? Margaret, did you remember, find out what it is? I had to look it up. A delineator has two definitions. The first one is that when you're doing a detour on a highway road, you see those candles, those orange candles, those are delineators. They're delineating the path. The second is when you're looking at a dress pattern and it says small, medium, large, cut here, those are delineator lines. So you learn something. So she leaves New York and goes to General Foods. Now we're now getting closer to the Depression. She's lucky to find a job, and she works to promote Swan's Down cake flour. And that is through demonstrations. She handled other agents. She's using her home economic background. And the last place that she worked is at Lever Brothers. I never heard of Spry either. Spry is a competition with Crisco. And it's definitely a back east thing. So she works to promote that, and at the last, she's their chief economist. So where does she live during this time? Because this also is part about who a person is where they live. She's in New England and Massachusetts. She renovates 2 different houses, one in Hanover and one in Norwell, Massachusetts. And this one's even recognized as a Betty Crocker house. We don't even have that in Deer Lodge. But she loves the New England fireplace look. And later on, at her house in Minnesota on the St. Croix River, she imports from New England a fireplace because she wants that in her house. So this becomes important when you see that she collects antiques, and it stays with her the rest of her life. It also influences how she arranges the test kitchens at General Mills. And this is the image also of the first Betty Crocker, that was painted by Nisha McVean or something like that. She's a commercial illustrator in 1935. This is the very first face of Betty Crocker. Before that, people would come and look for her, and they didn't find her. They'd say, the staff would say she's out, and sometimes if they confessed that she was not even there, they would cry when they found out that she wasn't there, or that she was, and later on they found out that she wasn't even real. Because she got marriage proposals. So, 10 at least. This is the other place that she lived in Minneapolis. It was built in 1950. And it's very stark contrast from the coziness of her English house, but it was close to work. I believe this is where she lived when she was I confirmed it when she was the director, that she had this place, and then this is her kitchen on the house that she bought on Marine St. Croix. This is her kitchen. This was in a McCall's magazine in 1949, where she's quoted as being a famous home economist. And if you notice, her walls are blue, her oven is here. Over in this corner is a stacked oven, and then next to that is her mixer. So it's a very efficient floor plan, but the rest of the house is filled with antiques and has a New England fireplace. This is Loring Park. Where the green is up at the top, that's where she lived, was right there in that kind of strange looking apartment building. So she was close to work. Work was downtown. This is the mill. And that is the terrace kitchen for one of the test kitchens that you could go and visit. They did tours. Like I said, there was this openness associated with this group. And they even printed the phone number, come see us, come see our kitchens. That was something that they really wanted people to know about so they could sell more flour. This book, we have a copy up front, has the 8 different portraits on the cover of it that were made of Betty Crocker over time. The 1955 one is the second one from the right, and that's a smiling Betty Crocker. The last one, which is this one, is a 75-person composite, and after years of Betty Crocker having blue eyes, she suddenly has brown eyes. This is in 1996, But General Mills was trying to be more egalitarian, reaching out to more people than just the white middle class background that they had always been focused on. And you don't see them using this image very much anymore. But in the early years, another thing that Janette Kelley is focused on and credited with is that when World War II ended, all these manufacturers had to retool up from doing defense work, and they did other kind of work. She was the perfect person to approach them about standardizing baking pan sizes. We take that for granted today, that when you have a recipe and it says use an 8 by 2 inch cake pan, that's what it's going to be, and you can go down and buy one. Everybody was making their own idea of a cake size. So she got them to change that, and that's why recipes became more successful. And in the front is a wooden box that I have here. Back in the 1926s or so, they sent those out for 70 cents. You paid 70 cents and you could get that wooden recipe box. It talks about kitchen-tested flour, that every bag of flour was tested, and that Betty Crocker was helping you all the way. And their motto was, you can do it, Betty will help you. Very positive. It wasn't like, oh, you dumb bunny, you don't know how to, mix a cake. No, you can do it, we can help you. A very positive statement. Oh, okay. This is the very first cake mix that was created under Janette Kelley's guidance. It's a ginger cake, and she focused on creating the one bowl mixing method. This was to save you time. Instead of having to cream everything separately, you could mix it all together in one bowl. The very first product under the Betty Crocker logo was actually a soup mix project. You can see this is a late rendition. I bought this last Christmas, and so it looks a little different because it has the Betty Crocker red spoon logo, which came out in 1954. But one of the things that they had trouble with was eggs. People wanted to put their own eggs in the cake mix. So research showed that that's why they weren't making as many sales, so they changed their formula so that you would add your own eggs in a cake mix. This is 1948, which was an ad that shows when she's the home service director. She was actually appointed in 1947. But what's interesting about this ad is they are letting the public know. This one, I think, was in Ladies' Home Journal. I'll have to look up it closer. But those are 21 home economists that were on staff, and they're showing which university that they graduated from. So that was really a different way of promoting women. And of course, there's the original 1936 Betty Crocker greeting you. And there's Janette Kelley up close as the director. And she's also credited for the chiffon cake sensation in 1948. I'm going to take a minute just to tell you this quick story because it's really interesting. And that is, this was a cake that General Mills, we're now at General Mills, paid a small fortune for, the recipe. Because a man by the name of Harry Baker out in California had a secret ingredient. And he made these cakes and he sold them to the Brown Derby restaurant. And everybody wanted his recipe, and he wouldn't give it to anybody. He would bake at his home, and he baked in his bedroom. I don't know how he did that, but anyway. And he never told anybody or let anybody even see his garbage, because he didn't want them to know the secret ingredient. How many people here know what the secret ingredient is of the chiffon? Margaret, do you know? I don't. The secret ingredient of a chiffon cake was salad oil. Yeah. Everything before that was made with shortening or with butter. So that was the cake sensation. And it also was popular because an angel food cake took so many more eggs. This took substantially fewer eggs to make. We made one in Deer Lodge recently when I spoke to a small group of people, and I had our local bakery make the chiffon cake recipe. We had fun with that. It was good. Okay, but Janette Kelley is the one that tested it so that you knew that what you were getting was a tried and true recipe. Betty Crocker had another woman by the name of Marjorie Child Husted, who actually worked there as the other home service director before Janette. And she perfected what we call the triple testing method. And that is the home economists create the recipe, they bake it, then she got the idea to send it out to home cooks all around Minneapolis. And they would take copious notes about how that recipe worked in their home kitchen. And then they reported back to Betty Crocker, and then Betty Crocker would work on fine-tuning it, and that was their triple test. So when you got a recipe and it hit the market, you could be successful. Okay. Yeah. This was interesting. This came out in 1948. What I found interesting about this cooking cookbook is that it was the first time that they had a lot of pictures. But what I really found interesting is notice the green logo for Betty Crocker. Before that, she was always red and white. Even all of her portraits are red and white. But they tried in 1948 to make her green. I don't think it worked because I didn't see any other logos after that year. These are the 5 test kitchens and what their names are. They were on the 5th floor of General Mills in downtown Minneapolis. You had the terrace kitchen, which we already talked about. That's general recipe testing. The camera kitchen, spelled with a K on purpose, those were photographs, food styling. It was a real art. At first, people failed at it because the biscuits would go flat and they would look dull. So they had to really work on that. The polka dot kitchen, this is appliance testing. I have some examples up here of those different kitchens. They're very colorful. And General Mills was into small appliances like irons. In Tomorrow's Kitchen, that was where they tested new food products. And Product Control Kitchen, that was baking tests, making sure that the flour did what it was supposed to do. Okay. And that's where they invited everybody to come and do tours. You could go and look at it. The early American dining room, does that look contemporary? 1948, 1950s? No, that's Janette Kelley's New England style dining room. And she brought that bias, I guess you could say, or that was her liking of that coziness to the test kitchens. That's where they served the food to the dignitaries, the people that would come to look at the different products there. They would sometimes have around 26,000 people coming a year to look at the tours. This is the 1950 January 1st edition, which is actually both these books. They're different printings. I don't have a true first edition. I have like a 5th and a 7th printing. But this one has the dust jacket on it. And this year, in 2025, that cookbook is 75 years old. All right. That's the dust jacket, still with the 1936 portrait of Betty Crocker, but it has pictures. And how many of you had, your parents maybe grew up with this red and white cookbook? Anybody? A few of you. Okay, so some of you recognize it. It was given as a wedding present a lot, and it was hugely successful. Millions and millions of copies were sold. This is, once again, this is just a little bit more of the up close. This is the polka dot, see the polka dot kitchen, the terrace blue kitchen, the camera setup, and that's the home service department up on top down at General Mills. Okay, thank you. This is 1954 and the development of their main logo that they use today. It was a oval shape that had Betty Crocker written in the middle of it in 1953, and then it was tweaked to become the famous Betty Crocker red spoon. You see that a lot now instead of the picture of an individual. And the Parade of Personalities, which was through the American Home Economics Association convention in Minneapolis, Janette Kelley was honored to be one of the people that everybody wanted to meet and talk about. There was about 600 attendees at this particular event, and this picture is from that time period. She also was involved with obtaining the keynote speaker by the name of George Grimm. George Grimm was a war correspondent for 20 years. So I thought that was interesting because he also writes a wonderful eulogy about Janette Kelley 2 days after she dies. Now, I'm just going to tell you about one other local interest tie-in to Janette Kelley. Her mother moved to live with her in about 1942. She was living with her back in Massachusetts and sold the family home in 1943. But Janette still came back. And one of the ways that she came back is through Betty Crocker and General Mills' introduction of what we call that, the Homemakers of Tomorrow Scholarship Program. Has anybody ever heard of that? One or two of you. It was huge. It was a 150 question test that was given to high school senior, usually women, until later on in the 70s when they allowed men to participate. It started in 1954, and they received a pin. That's what this is. This is the Betty Crocker Homemaker of Tomorrow pin from 1956, and this is a later edition of one done a little bit later. And this is Joyce Kramer, who graduated from Deer Lodge High School, Powell County High School, and went on to become the state winner where she won $1,500. That paid back in 1956 dollars. That paid for almost 2 years of education for her at Montana State University in Bozeman. She later went on to become a science teacher and became a Teacher of the Year in Utah. I had the privilege of talking to her sister. Is Carol here by any chance? She didn't know if she could make it. And she just told me how that $1,500 scholarship just tripled everybody's chance in her family of going to college. Her family were ranchers south of Deer Lodge, and that hadn't been in the cards. But General Mills did this across the country. They were looking for more consumers, more people to sell flour to down the road. They invested $2.1 million in this program and over the years, and it was very successful, but it was interesting to read the test questions, and they were pretty challenging. I don't know how anyone could answer them. It was a challenge. They said that if you were a good test taker, you could probably pass this test. So, and this is one of my favorite books because it tells you a little bit about Janette Kelley's personality. She had a sense of humor. She also kept in touch with people as she moved around the country. For example, this was the 1957 Girls and Boys Cookbook that she was involved with creating. And she keeps in touch with a friend of hers that used to work with her at Lever Brothers and makes a call and says, I need some kids. to be recipe testers for this kid's cookbook. And she was calling New Jersey to a friend by the name of Thelma. And that's how they got the girls and boys to be the testers. I was raised on that little cookbook, and I, the other day, opened it up for the first time in decades, and it brought back so much nostalgia. I just recall that. It's a great cookbook even for kids today. So that was 1957. We're almost at the end here. In 1958, General Mills decides to create a new headquarters in Golden Valley, Minnesota, about 4 miles west of Minneapolis. This is the grand opening of it. In February of 1958, Janette Kelley resigns her position due to ill health, and she gets to live to see the grand opening of the Arizona Desert, California, Cape Cod, Chinatown, Hawaiian, Pennsylvania Dutch, and Williamsburg test kitchens. They did discontinue doing tours in 1985, but they're still doing test kitchens work today. And this is her last resting place. It's in the Hillcrest Cemetery in Deer Lodge, Montana. And I was out there the other day. That's her site, the Kelley site, and it's listed. That's the only thing that Deer Lodge has ever recognized about Janette Kelley is her resting site. So what next? I want to establish the Janette Kelley Test Kitchen, your culinary experience in Deer Lodge. I would like to do it, hopefully, at the fairgrounds, but we shall see where it ends up. There is a commercial kitchen there now. I would like to see it become a place that tourists could actually have a culinary experience when they are visiting the Car and Prison Museum and the Coors Ranch. And I think these are my thank yous. Some of them anyway. I had lots of people that helped me. This is the book on home economist. This is the book on Susan Mark's book. And these are some of the people that I immediately said helped me. There were more, but that's all the time I had. And this is the Red Pie cookbook that many of you may have gotten later in life. It's called the Red Pie Cookbook. And that was after Janette Kelley's time. She, like I said, she died on the 24th of March, 1958. And that's the end of the presentation.